The stars were quiet, too quiet. For over 2 centuries, not a single human signal had echoed through the void. Across the galactic core, in the great throne worlds of the Coalition, it became an unspoken truth. Humanity was extinct. No new transmissions, no sightings, no responses to ancient hails or data beacon pings. Earth, once called Sol Prime, had vanished beneath layers of myth, radiation, and silence. The last known coordinates showed a star choked in ash, its planetary cradle scarred by orbital bombardment and cascading climate collapse. And so, the galaxy moved on. Humanity became legend, one of 1,000 failed species who reached too far, too fast, and vanished. But legends have a habit of returning, sharpened, changed, and carrying vengeance. The turning point came on the cold edge of the Telethi expanse, a dead zone of collapsing stars and broken wormholes, a place avoided by even the boldest smugglers. It was there, buried beneath 600 years of ice and debris, that relay station K-47 flickered to life for the first time in generations. Its power core whined. Rotating antennae groaned. Old AI subroutines, half insane with age, reassembled long-forgotten encryption keys. And then, a signal. No words, no standard hails, just a wave of data. Dense, elegant, terrifyingly efficient. The station's ancient memory core began to crack under the pressure of it. Onboard systems recorded the transmission as originating from a fleet of 57 vessels. Unknown class. Unknown design. Their formation pattern was too perfect, synchronized like a school of predators. Their drives left trails of micro-singularities and particle flux signatures no one in the modern galaxy could identify. But one thing was unmistakable. They flew under a black banner, not black from paint, but from the sheer absorption of light itself. Matte carbon armor layered in overlapping hex shields. Beneath it, etched in ancient alloy, was the unmistakable insignia last seen on the ruins of Earth's orbital command towers. The Terran Starburst, a single 8-pointed flare encased in a broken ring, symbol of the fallen Terran ascendancy. The Coalition initially dismissed it. Prank. Propaganda. Pirate stunt. Their analysts scoffed. Humanity was dead. Every AI simulation, every long-term probability matrix had confirmed it. This was just noise in the dark. Then relay station K-47 went silent. 4 hours later, the second station, Orbitwatch Theta, a Telethi military outpost monitoring the sector, detected an anomaly. A vessel. Massive. Stealthed. Moving against gravity vectors, as if space itself bent to accommodate it. The outpost hailed it. No response. Then, in less than a millisecond, the outpost ceased to exist. Not destroyed. Erased. A gravitational compression field folded the station inward before anyone could react. The explosion never came. There was only implosion. 1,000 personnel reduced to singularity-grade ash. The fleet was real. The High Coalition Security Council convened an emergency summit on Yeren Prime. For the first time in over a century, the 12 ruling species, the Thalneri, the Janeri hive, the crystalline Ithrel chorus, sat in silence. The footage was clear. The telemetry undeniable. It was humanity, but not as they remembered. Impossible, hissed Archseer Vakol of the Synaptic Janeri. They cannot have survived. We burned their world, sealed their colonies, collapsed their gates. Then explain this, said the Thalneri admiral, as he threw a holochart onto the table. Explain Leviathan Ix, a dreadnought class that never existed in our records. Explain weapons that manipulate subspace without needing exotic matter. Explain a fleet that should not be. Across the galaxy, panic took root. Dozens of species had taken part in humanity's so-called containment. Old battles were buried under diplomatic lies and sterilized archives. But for those who remembered the truth, the Terran wars were not mere containment. They had been a genocidal purge. Now, the children of Earth had returned, and they were not hiding. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, Galactic War Stories is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you love epic sci-fi battles, deep space mysteries, and the untold stories of the cosmos, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this universe together. Aboard the reawakens, one of the largest dreadnoughts in the Coalition fleet, Admiral Kirath of the Thalnari Empire studied the reports in silence. The humans, if they were truly human, had not responded to any hails, but they had broadcast one thing. A short message on repeat, encoded in a dozen dead Earth dialects. We remember everything. Simple, haunting, devastating. Kirath narrowed his eyes as he watched the fleet's trajectory. They weren't heading for the galactic core. They weren't even targeting major military installations. They were returning to their old colonies, graveyards of Terran ambition, now held by other species. Terraforming had long since erased the human architecture. New cities had been built atop scorched ruins. Statues of victors replaced old heroes. It was as if the galaxy had forgotten they were ever there. But now, the dead had returned. Not as ghosts, but as fire and vengeance. The Coalition's response was immediate, but not coordinated. Across the galaxy, species that had once feared the unstoppable might of humanity found themselves divided. Some believed this return to be a threat that had to be neutralized, an extinction-level event that demanded a united front. Others saw the human fleet as a shadow of its former self, a weakened remnant with no real power. But the truth, as always, was far more complicated. Admiral Kirath stood alone on the observation deck of the reawakens, the flagship of the Thalnari fleet. Before him, the stars stretched out into the endless dark, but his mind was far from the distant lights. The reawakens was already positioning itself at the boundary of the Great Dark Rift, a cosmic wound in spacetime known for swallowing ships whole. But it wasn't just the rift that troubled him. It was the messages the human fleet had sent. The cryptic signals, the ancient names, the defiant ships. The message wasn't one of negotiation or peace, and Kirath knew that was a mistake. The Thalnari had always been a pragmatic species. For centuries, they had watched empires rise and fall, their philosophies and ambitions laid to rest under the weight of cosmic truth. War was inevitable, and it came for everyone, eventually. It was how you responded to it that determined whether your civilization lived or died. But there was something different about humanity's return. The fleet didn't look like an invading force. The ships were too old. They were remnants of a lost age, but not destroyed, not weak. Kirath remembered what he had seen in the records, the Terran fleets that had once launched from their homeworld out into the cosmos. Early human exploration vessels, cracked and scraped from the rough life of interstellar pioneers. They had pushed the boundaries, never waiting for approval. Too many battles, too many desperate, short-sighted decisions, too much arrogance. But that was not what Kirath saw before him now. What was left of humanity was something far more terrifying. For one, the technology they wielded now seemed alien. No one, not even the ethereal chorus, known for their mastery of quantum manipulation, had seen the types of subspace weapons now embedded in these ships' hulls. The weapons were capable of rupturing the fabric of reality itself. A single blast could collapse multiple systems, tearing stars apart like fragile paper. And then there was the Valkyrie, the lead ship of the fleet. It was a monstrous sight. Its dark hull, impossibly sleek and angular, seemed to absorb the light around it, the very edges shimmering with a faint glow of radiated heat. But it wasn't just its size or shape that held Kirath's gaze. The name, it was familiar, like an echo in his mind. The Valkyrie had once been humanity's flagship, before the fall, the vessel that had led the charge in their greatest battles. But it was a relic now, a reminder of a forgotten time. Its weapon systems had been upgraded. The Valkyrie's current form, a brutal hybrid of organic and technological components, defied known science. It was no longer the pride of a lost empire. It was its final judgment. Humanity had not just survived, they had evolved, and they had learned to fight with the kind of savagery only desperation can foster. The Admiral turned to his command console. On the screen, the remaining members of the Coalition fleet were preparing for a full-scale engagement. Each ship, ranging from the Janari warcruisers to the ethereal bioships, was bristling with weapons, their engines humming with the anticipation of battle. Their leaders had given their orders. The fleets were already lining up to confront the human armada. But K'Arath hesitated. In the early days of his career, the stories of humanity had made him uneasy. He remembered the archives. The Terran wars were brutal, chaotic. Humans fought with an unyielding, chaotic energy, and their numbers never mattered. It was their will to survive, to adapt, that made them dangerous. They could change the course of an entire war in a day. They had pushed entire species to extinction, forcing the galaxy to adapt to their relentless drive. But the human race wasn't fighting now for survival, was it? The fleet was returning to old colonies, worlds thought abandoned, forgotten systems. This wasn't just about taking back territory. This was about reclaiming history, and perhaps something far darker. As the fleet drew closer, more data began to pour in. The first interception probe, launched in an attempt to scout the enemy's formation, was obliterated before it even made contact. The second probe was swallowed by an electromagnetic anomaly too complex to calculate. Any communication with the human ships was met with silence. A message from the Leviathan AX appeared on K'Arath's console. The Admiral read it with growing dread. "Prepare. We are coming home." The human fleet's trajectory had not changed. They were on a course for the outer colonies, worlds that were now populated by other species who had settled in the ashes of humanity's legacy. Some were too far gone to even recognize the Terran ruins buried beneath their cities. But others had known. And now, they would feel the weight of the forgotten. For the first time, K'Arath felt the quiet certainty of fear. Humanity was not just coming back. They were coming back angry. As the human fleet approached the border of Coalition space, the galaxy watched with bated breath. Every sensor network across the outer rim crackled with interference. Communications went dark. There was a strange calm, as if space itself were holding its breath. The humans hadn't made any hostile moves. No direct assaults, no demands. But their silence was more unnerving than any barrage of firepower. They weren't asking for peace. They weren't pleading for aid. They were simply returning. On the Virexental, Admiral K'Arath's mind raced. His once clear mission to confront the human threat now seemed muddled. The humans, those reckless and fiery beings of old, had not returned with fleets of endless numbers. There were only 57 ships, each one more ancient and enigmatic than the last. But it was what those ships carried that made K'Arath uneasy. The Leviathan AX had always been one of humanity's greatest technological marvels, an apex of human ingenuity, designed to face the horrors of interstellar war. But it wasn't the ship's firepower that concerned K'Arath. It was the minds aboard. From intercepted transmission fragments, it was clear that these humans were not the same as the chaotic, young species he'd read about. These humans had changed, adapted, become something more. Aboard the Virexental, K'Arath walked to the command bridge, a stark, sterile space where his officers and crew awaited his orders. The viewports were filled with the cold beauty of the expanse. His eyes lingered on the stars, a distant part of his mind searching for any trace of the human fleet. His thoughts were interrupted by the low hum of the tactical console. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Sereth, his second in command. "The humans have entered the edge of the loyal system. The fleet has split into two groups. One is holding position above the gas giant, and the other is moving toward the fourth planet." K'Arath's sharp gaze cut toward the holographic projection of the system. Loyal IV, the fourth planet, had once been a thriving human colony, a paradise for exploration. But when humanity had fallen, it had been abandoned. It was now a cold, desolate world, reclaimed by the galaxy's other inhabitants. Yet now, the humans were heading straight for it, as if the ruins of their ancestors called to them. "What do we know about their intentions?" Kyrath asked. Captain Sereth hesitated. "Nothing. No communication. No attempt at negotiation. Only their movements." Kyrath stood silent for a moment. His mind churned with the possibilities. The humans were not acting like conquerors, they were remembering. Loyal IV had been a symbol of their first interstellar victory. It was more than just a colony. It was a sacred world. And if they were returning there, it wasn't for diplomacy. No, there was something deeper at play, something that burned inside of them, as old as their species itself. "They don't want a war," Kyrath muttered to himself. "They want to reclaim what's theirs." Suddenly, the comm systems flared to life with an emergency transmission from the Leviathan IX. The frequency was tight, too tight. They weren't just sending a standard message. They were encoding something into the very fabric of the signal itself. "Sir, the message is not in standard encryption," said Lieutenant Rira, the ship's communications officer. "It's older." Kyrath walked over to the console, leaning forward. "Play it." The room fell silent as the message played, each word laced with an ancient, almost forgotten cadence. The voice was not robotic. It was human, heavy with emotion, with anger. The message was brief, but its implications were devastating. "You took everything from us, and now we take it back. This is your final warning." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in a thick silence. The room was tense. Kyrath's fists clenched at his sides. Full fleet readiness. Prepare to engage. Set course for Loyal IV. Across the galaxy, tension rippled. The Coalition's military units were already assembling at the edges of the Loyal system, but it was clear the humans weren't waiting for permission. They would not stop for negotiations, and they would not back down. Their motives were no longer a mystery. This was about the reclamation of an empire that never truly died. It was about the return of the human will to dominate, to survive, to remember. As Kyrath issued orders, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, how had they survived all this time? What had kept them hidden for so long? The last human transmissions had ended abruptly 2 centuries ago, and the remnants of their civilization were thought to be nothing but scattered debris, swallowed by the unforgiving void of space. But now, as the Verigsental prepared to move, he understood. The humans hadn't disappeared. They had bided their time. And now, they were coming for everything. The atmosphere on Loyal IV was still, eerily so. The ancient colony's capital had been reduced to little more than a series of crumbled dome structures, twisted by the elements and overrun by native fauna. The planet, once a proud symbol of humanity's expansion into the stars, had long since been abandoned. Over time, the settlers had been driven out, their colonies replaced by the sleek, hyper-modern cities of alien races. Loyal IV was a dead world, a museum of the past, with a barren landscape that seemed to mock the very idea of human resilience. Yet, as the human fleet came into view, all that changed. From the command deck of the Verigsental, Kyrath's eyes narrowed. The human ships had settled into position above the planet, their formations precise, calculated. There was no chaos, no erratic movements typical of an attacking force. This was deliberate. The Leviathan X, the flagship, led the charge, flanked by the rest of the fleet. The sheer size of the dreadnoughts and battle cruisers overshadowed the coalition ships still in orbit, their advanced cloaking tech rendering them nearly invisible, save for the eerie shimmer of energy pulsing through their shields. "They've landed," said Sereth, staring at the planet's surface through the observation viewport. "They're not attacking. They're waiting." Kyrath's mind raced. The message they had sent was clear. We take it back. But what exactly were they taking? The planet, the system, or something far more personal, something that had been left behind? a connection to their ancestors, something that, to the humans, was far more important than any colony or strategic advantage. "Activate all scanners," Kyrath ordered. "I want a full sweep of the area, and prepare to engage. I don't care if they're waiting. If they don't respond to hails, we move in." The crew sprang into action, running through their protocols, but deep inside, Kyrath knew this wasn't just about military strategy. He could feel it. There was a feeling in the air, a pulse of something ancient, something forgotten. The humans were not here to conquer. They had come to reclaim. As the Varix and Tal descended into the orbit of Loyal IV, a new wave of fear began to settle over the crew. It wasn't fear of the enemy. It was fear of the unknown. They could see the human ships now, hovering silently above the surface. There was no gunfire, no hostile actions. But the silence, it was suffocating. It was as if the galaxy itself had forgotten how to speak. Signal from the Valkyrie, Admiral, came the voice of Lieutenant Rera. They're broadcasting on all frequencies again. The message is different this time. Kyrath straightened. This was the moment. The humans had kept their silence for too long. Now, they were breaking it, finally showing their hand. "Play it," Kyrath ordered. This time, the transmission was not a declaration of war or even a warning. It was a call, a single voice, human, soft, but filled with an intensity that made every word feel like it was tearing through the very fabric of space itself. "You never understood us, did you? You thought you erased us, but you were wrong. We are not gone. We are here. We have always been here." Kyrath felt a strange chill settle in his bones. His thoughts snapped to the decades-long campaign to wipe out the human remnants. It had been clean, efficient, but there were always whispers of human ships that vanished into the stars, of survivors who refused to be erased. And now those whispers were real. They were not echoes. They were the voice of something that had been dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The voice on the transmission continued. "This is not just a war. This is a reckoning." A soft rumble reverberated through the ship. It wasn't from the engines. It was the planet itself. Kyrath could feel it. The ground beneath his boots seemed to pulse, as if Loyal Ivy itself was answering the humans. He watched as the human fleet aligned in a perfect formation over the planet's surface. They were not moving. They were waiting. "What is happening?" Kyrath whispered, barely aware he was speaking aloud. Then, with a suddenness that shattered the tension, a massive column of light erupted from the surface of Loyal IV. It shot upward, slicing through the atmosphere and breaking into the space above the planet. It was like nothing Kyrath had ever seen. No known technology could manipulate energy on this scale. It was pure, unfiltered power, pulsing with an energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality around it. "It's them," Lieutenant Rera said, her voice trembling. "They're activating a signal, a beacon." Kyrath's eyes widened. The humans were not just waiting. They were calling something. Something big. The Viregs and Tal scanners whirred to life, struggling to keep up with the energy readings. But it was like trying to measure the heartbeat of a dying star. There was no accurate way to understand the scale of what was happening. Suddenly, the comm systems flared to life again. But this time, it wasn't the humans who were transmitting. The entire system seemed to shake as if a thunderclap had resounded across the very core of Loyal IV. And then, in a split second, a voice echoed through every ship's communication system. It wasn't human. It wasn't even of this galaxy. The voice was ancient, monolithic, resonating like a collective chant passed through centuries of distant civilizations. "We remember." Kyrath froze. The stars themselves seemed to dim. A new presence had awakened on Loyal IV, something far beyond the reach of any fleet, any species, something that had been waiting as long as the humans had, waiting for this moment. And now, the humans had called it back. The reckoning had begun. The voice, That deep, ancient resonance echoed in Kyrath's mind. It was as if the universe itself had been awakened from a long slumber. Across the galaxy, every ship, every station, every sentient mind that was in range felt it. A thrum, deep in their bones, vibrating through the air, through the stars. It was a sound unlike anything ever encountered before. The language it spoke was unintelligible, but its meaning was undeniable. It was a command, a summons, the beginning of something far beyond the human species. For a moment, all was silent. The chaos that Kyrath had feared was suspended, like a calm before a storm, the tension thick enough to choke. His crew was paralyzed, their eyes wide in disbelief as the energy readings from the surface of Loyal IV shot off the charts. It was as though the planet itself had become an amplifier for something buried in its depths, something that had been forgotten for centuries. Admiral. Sirith's voice was strained, pulling Kyrath from his reverie. The humans, they're not alone. Kyrath's gaze snapped to the holographic display. The image of Loyal IV flickered, revealing multiple, impossible structures emerging from beneath the planet's surface. These weren't ruins. They were alive. Monumental spires of metal and organic material, pulsing with the same strange energy as the light column that had erupted earlier. The structures, vast and alien, seemed to fold in on themselves, expanding outward as though waking from a long dormant slumber. There, Kyrath couldn't find the words. His training, his years of preparation for this moment, had not accounted for this. The humans had always been unpredictable, chaotic even, but they were never this. This isn't just a fleet, Sirith continued, her voice barely a whisper. This is something more. And then it hit him, the realization that shook Kyrath to his core. The humans hadn't just come back with vengeance on their minds. They were bringing the past with them, something that had been hidden for so long, buried beneath the ruins of their ancient colonies, now emerged in full force. Activate the planetary shields. Kyrath barked, his voice cold with urgency. But as the command echoed throughout the bridge, a different message came through. This one from the human fleet. Admiral, came Lieutenant Rira's strained voice. The human flagship, Leviathan AX, is transmitting again. It's a direct message to us. On all frequencies. Kyrath's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment. The humans had made their move. But what were they going to say? Were they ready to negotiate, or had the last transmission been the start of a new war? Either way, the consequences would be dire. Play it. Kyrath commanded, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. He knew that what came next would define the future of the galaxy. The screen flickered, and once again, the human transmission filled the bridge. But this time, it was not a voice that spoke. It was an image, a powerful hologram that projected out of the Leviathan IX. It was a symbol, ancient, yet undeniably human. The image of a hand reaching upward, with flames of light swirling around it. At first, it appeared to be a simple emblem, but then the energy from the image began to pulse, growing stronger, as if the symbol itself were alive. The flames spiraled, weaving into an intricate design, one that Kyrath knew all too well. The Starfire mark, he whispered, his voice barely audible. It can't be. The Starfire mark was an ancient human symbol, one of legend. According to myth, it had been the sigil of the first human explorers, a symbol of unity, of hope, and of defiance against overwhelming odds. But it was more than just a symbol. It was said to be a key to something buried deep within the galaxy, something that the humans had never fully understood. And now it was being activated. Admiral, Sirith said quietly, the ships, they're starting to move. Kyrath's eyes snapped back to the fleet. The human ships, once still, now began to pivot. Their engines powered up with a low, ominous hum. But it wasn't their weapon systems that had activated. It was the energy within them. The Leviathan IX, along with the rest of the human fleet, was now surrounded by an almost visible aura, a distortion in the fabric of space itself. It was as if the fleet had become one with the energy coursing through the planet below. The Virex trembled, as if the very weight of what was happening was pressing against the ship. The Starfire mark flashed again on the display, and then, without warning, a beam of light shot out from the human fleet. It wasn't just any beam. It was pure energy, bending the space around it, creating ripples in the void. The beam hit Loyal IV with the force of 1,000 suns, and the entire planet seemed to shudder in response. On the surface, the massive spires of alien design began to glow, their structures shifting and transforming. Something was emerging from the depths of Loyal IV, a massive networked structure that seemed to link the entire planet together. It was alive, ancient, and it was awakening. All ships, prepare for. Kyrath's command was cut off by the sudden, sharp hum of the comms system. This time, it was not the humans who spoke. It was the planet itself. It has begun. Kyrath froze, a chill running down his spine. It was as if the very words had been etched into his consciousness, a whisper from beyond the stars. And in that moment, he understood. The humans had not come to conquer the galaxy. They had come to awaken something older, something far beyond their own understanding, something that had been dormant for eons. And now, with that awakening, the galaxy would never be the same. The voice echoed across the fleet, deep and unyielding, as if it came from the very bones of the galaxy. It was not a command. It was an understanding, as if the universe itself had suddenly revealed a truth that had been hidden for millennia. It has begun. Kyrath stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The words hung in the air, impossibly heavy, the weight of an ancient revelation pressing down on him. He looked out at the swirling maelstrom of energy that enveloped Loyal IV. The human fleet, its ships now glowing with a strange, otherworldly light, had become part of the planet itself. The boundary between them seemed to be fading. They weren't merely orbiting. They were integrated into the fabric of this place, this strange nexus that had been awakened. Admiral, Surith's voice was tight, as if she was holding back a tidal wave of fear. What is this? Kyrath didn't have an answer. His mind raced through every database, every piece of information at his disposal, but nothing matched what he was seeing. No species in the galaxy had the capability to do something like this. The energy signatures were ancient, beyond anything the Coalition had encountered. And the structures emerging from Loyal IV's surface, those were not just relics. They were living entities, alive in ways Kyrath could barely comprehend. Another voice, this time from Lieutenant Rira, cut through his thoughts. Admiral, look at the humans. Their ships, they're changing. Kyrath turned. His eyes locked onto the holographic projections of the human fleet. The ships, once sleek, modern constructs, were now becoming something else. Their hulls shimmered as if the very material was shifting, adapting. Alien symbols, patterns unlike any known to the galaxy, began to emerge across their surfaces, glowing with an iridescent light. The Leviathan AX, once the pride of the human fleet, had become a living organism, a hybrid of metal and biology, pulsing with the same energy that radiated from the planet. It was then that Kyrath realized the terrifying truth. The humans had not returned with mere vengeance. They had come to evolve, to transcend. The entire fleet was sensing with the planet's core, with the very energy that had been locked beneath the surface of Loyal IV. The Starfire mark was no longer just a symbol, it was a key that had unlocked something vast and ancient, something that even the humans had barely begun to understand. Suddenly, the entire fleet shifted as one, moving towards the surface of Loyal IV. The atmosphere crackled with raw energy, and Kyrath could feel the power intensifying, like a storm building on the horizon. The alien structures that had once been dormant now began to rise, twisting and reforming as though answering the call. Tendrils of energy reached out from the planet, connecting with the ships in orbit. The space around them seemed to ripple, folding in on itself, warping in a way that defied all logic. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, a storm of energy exploded outward, engulfing the Varigzantal and the rest of the Coalition fleet in a blinding wave of light. For a moment, Kyrath thought they were all doomed, obliterated in an instant by the sheer magnitude of the release. But when the light faded, when his vision returned, he realized that the Varigzantal had not been destroyed. They had been transformed. The space around them had changed. The ship and every other vessel in the fleet was no longer in the same location. It wasn't just the physical coordinates that had shifted. It was something far deeper. The galaxy itself had warped, as if it had been realigned by an unseen hand. Kyrath's mind reeled. He had been through battles, faced insurmountable odds, but this was different. This wasn't just warfare. It was something far beyond his understanding. The humans and their allies, had tapped into something that could change the very nature of existence itself. And then, the transmission came through again. This time, the message wasn't for the fleet. It wasn't for the galaxy. It was a message for Kyrath. The face of a human appeared on the screen. A man, weathered but resolute, his eyes piercing as they locked onto Kyrath's. There was no arrogance in his gaze, only an undeniable sense of purpose. "Admiral Kyrath," the man spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of centuries. "We are the last remnants of a forgotten time. You believed us wiped from the stars, but we were merely waiting." The man's gaze softened, as if acknowledging something Kyrath couldn't quite grasp. "We are no longer the humans you remember. The galaxy is no longer the one you knew. You will have to decide, Admiral. Will you fight us for control of the stars, or will you join us as we rewrite the future?" The transmission cut off, and the silence that followed was deafening. Kyrath stood there, motionless, as the weight of the choice pressed upon him. The galaxy was changing, irrevocably, and the humans had become something more, something that could reshape everything. His mind spun, caught between the impossible and the inevitable. The humans were not merely survivors. They were masters of something that had been lost. They had become something beyond their own history, tapping into forces that no species had ever fully understood. But what did this mean for him? For the galaxy? And more importantly, what would happen next? The silence that followed the transmission was broken by a single command. "Admiral," Sereth said, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" Kyrath stood in the stillness of space, gazing at the human fleet, no longer an enemy, but a force of destiny. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the next chapter to begin. And as the light of a new era began to shine across the galaxy, Kyrath understood. The reckoning had not only arrived, it had already begun.